we all want credit for our good work, but it's another thing to kind of ask for it and display it and everything else. So I kind of try to, work with people on that stuff to make sure that they're not, behaving that way. It just isn't a very senior way. And you see a lot of people, kind of do that. And you're just like, dude, you're just like, kind of like screwing up the vibe here with your, inordinate amount of backpats needed.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Teamwork. You've probably heard the saying that teamwork makes the dream work. When you want to create great teams, you really must have a lot of things working inside the culture. You must bring in great people, and we must create the kind of leadership that makes great teams thrive. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how to create great teams. We're talking with Todd Ehrlich. Todd is the owner of BAMFi. Really is an interesting conversation because we go into some of the details of how he creates teams and some of the things that didn't work, some of the things that do work, and we really uncover some of those strategies. So that's what I like most about this interview. Make sure you tune in to Todd talk about how to create great teams. Okay, I will warn you, there's a few technical difficulties with this interview. It's so good that I didn't want to toss it away. Todd's a very busy person, and we just wanted to put this out there so that you can really take what you want from it. Thanks for tuning in here to Grow Think Tank. Really excited about sharing this with you. And before you run, I have done so many interviews in the last few weeks. I have such an exciting time to share with you that those interviews have been organized into the 12 core principles of fast growth companies. So all you have to do to get that is go to genehammett.com/worksheet. So you can get the 12 principles, and I've been able to go in there and find which episodes will align to each individual episode. When you subscribe to Grow Think Tank, you will find exactly what you need so that you can move forward. And many of them haven't been published yet, depending on when you're hearing this, but you can tune in to the date that means the most to you. So here's the interview with Todd. Hey, Todd, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks, Gene.
Well, I'm excited to have you here at the Growth Think Tank, the podcast where we talk about all things about growing companies fast. BAMFi has grown really fast. You were number 121 on the Inc. list in 2019. Tell us a little bit about what BAMFi is and what makes you different.
So we're basically a technology company for what I call secured lending. We are also a lender, but moving forward, we're really going to focus more on technology. What makes us different is we're in a very kind of niche space in the secured lending market, and we're trying to bring world-class software into that space in a way that really hasn't been done in the spaces in the areas we touch yet.
How many employees do you have, Todd?
33.
And you've had other businesses before, because I remember you talking to you're really good at building teams. Like, what makes you good at building teams?
I'm a former military guy. Kind of started out in the Navy and, went through SEAL training, and that, definitely is a forging effect, if you will, on team building. But we've been a team player my whole life, from sports at a younger age to the Navy, and then working with some really great people after the Navy. So kind of got a little, kind of a sports aspect, a military aspect, and then kind of a private business aspect.
And when you think about your company growing to the pace it has now, you've really focused on building teams. So tell us just a little bit about some of the core principles of great teams.
Sure. So I think, there's many different types of teams. I would say that what makes my teams great is, building on trust and behavior that are, there's kind of aspects there that are super important to building teams. I mean, you have teams where you have like super high powered, great people, managed by kind of a autocratic boss who's like, do this, do that. And, micromanages everybody. I kind of tend to operate a team that's a little bit more like, you got a lot of smart people, and you start off with really great, smart people who are really good and can work on their own. And then, you just kind of guide them in the right direction. That's, instead of kind of, prescribing what they need to do on a daily basis, I like to hear from them what they want to do and let them take it from there. Because my assumption is that if you got on the team, you're smart enough to be here, and I don't need to tell you how to do your job. That's refreshing for a lot of people. So that's worked really well in attracting what I would call, smarter people to the team. And then my teams, I'm the proverbial, dumbest guy in the room. And I say that, kind of tongue in cheek, meaning, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, but, relatively speaking, the folks on my team, they're going to build an Excel model faster than me. They're going to be able to review a document quicker than I am. They're going to be able to do a lot of things faster than I can. But on some of the more subtle, aspects of business and working on a team, I'm going to be able to guide them and give them, good feedback on how to perform at a high level.
So those are some of the core principles. I want to dive deeper, but I want to go back to something you said there. It's refreshing when you're not micromanaging people. It really is a big problem today in micromanaging. Why do you think that's such a prevalent issue inside of our businesses?
Well, I think there's a lot of, kind of the knowledge and the books that are written and everything else, tend to have like a life cycle. And there's been a lot of, management, a lot of philosophy on manager, these things that they do to be great managers. And people, take those prescriptions from those books and then they follow them kind of to the letter. And, I've just got a bunch of experience trying things that people have recommended, trying things that things I've read, and very quickly determining whether for me and my folks, whether they worked or not. Great example, like kind of the way we do. I had a board member recommend that I do these one-on-one meetings every week with my team, each person individually, and that turned into a really weird scenario where it started a kind of a cycle of politics. So basically, everybody was able to have this private one-on-one with me, and then they would go. They would unload a bunch of stuff about other people on the team and use that as an opportunity to do it. So I kind of shut that down, where there's not a lot of stuff happening like that. So it's like we're like people always say, hey, with this other person on the team, like, let's talk about it on the Monday morning meeting, and it'll either by the time we get to Monday morning, it's solved already, or we talk about it and somebody else on the team solves the problem, and it wasn't really a problem to begin with. So like shutting down kind of political traps before they get started is something I learned. And instead of like, just like, kind of dogmatically following these rules, I've taken a kind of like, is this working or not in real time approach.
Hold on for a second. Todd just talked about micromanagement. Now, I've talked to a lot of leaders who really want to improve this aspect of their game in leadership. They do trust their team, but for some reason, they still want to micromanage. Well, Todd talks about it, but I want to go really specifically into this. Micromanagement is the opposite of empowerment. Your A players, your top talent, want to be empowered. They want to know that you trust them and want to know that you appreciate their ideas, that you allow them to make decisions, even if they're wrong sometimes, but they are willing to put in their heart and soul if you really empower them, because they're not getting that somewhere else. So if they get it from you, they're going to increase that sense of loyalty and increase your sense of ownership. Now back to Todd. I haven't heard many people talk about the ineffectiveness of one-on-one meetings. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us from your experience. So how do you keep tuned in to what an individual person is doing and really where they're growing and what's really on their mind?
So I try to take the approach of I'm taking them to lunch. I'm, dropping into their office saying hi. I keep all that stuff within business hours. But not trying to like get into people's weekend hours or evening hours when they're spending time with their family, but really like during the day, like, hey, take 30 minutes out of my day to focus on somebody else. And that's, because when you have a scheduled one-on-one, people prepare for it and they spend all this time preparing instead of working. And so I was like, okay, how much time did you spend putting this, slide deck together? Like to impress me with it, like it's sort of a waste of time. So that kind of led me to, I'm just going to drop in on people. And that might freak them out a little bit, but like, it's going to be kind of a no harm, no foul thing. And then they're not wasting time preparing for me.
So more informal than a formal one-on-one scheduled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And maybe a weeks go by where we don't need to have a talk or whatever. Or I'm very confident based on, kind of our executive meetings that we have twice a week, Monday. Like maybe based on that meeting, I got enough what I need out of them that I don't need to carry on a, continuing 1 hour.
Well, I really appreciate you just giving us some of that detail behind this. I want to go into some of the other steps you've taken to create great teams. So we know we've got to hire smart people. We know that we've got to, you didn't use the word empowerment, but I'm going to go ahead and throw that out there. You got to empower them, which is the opposite of micromanagement. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, the number one thing you find with most people coming into a startup, they're usually coming from, if they haven't come from another startup, they're coming from another enterprise where they just felt stifled by the corporation. And here they want to stretch their, wings and get in that, so we're just basically giving them what they want and letting them run with it. We're all super busy. So like sitting there and telling them how to do everything is, not that time. What I found is, and what I warn people is, like, if in the first 90 days you haven't figured it out, like, you're probably not going to. So if you're not willing to take that risk of, like, you're not going to be here after 90 days, then, don't come. And that, it probably scares away, 5% of the people or 10% of the people, but it's usually enough to, keep people from making the jump if they're not supremely confident in their ability. It also sets up the kind of, mental, hurdle where they're like, hey, I got 90 days to prove myself. And, because I find that a lot of people join a company and that's like when they stop. They're like, oh, I passed the interview test. I'm in. Now I'm not going to do anything. I make it like, hey, we're watching you like a hawk for 90 days. And if you haven't like impressed us after 90 days, you're not going to make it.
Do you call that 90-day period anything specific or just the first 90 days?
No, it's just the first 90 days. Yeah, I mean, again, like, a lot of people try to codify a lot of these things. And it's just like, I kind of feel like, formalizing too much of this stuff can be detrimental to the process. With that being said, I have, formalized some things like pre-screening testing and some things like that, where we're really more focused on, understanding somebody's personality and whether they'll fit into the team, which I think I mentioned to you before, but that's a big part of our screening process. And keeping folks out is that shouldn't be here is a great first step to, kind of getting, the right folks on the team.
Let's pause here for a second. The first 90 days. How intentional are you about that first 90-day experience for your employees? How intentional are you about the first week? Well, even the first day, if you could really get that right, you're really setting the right tone. But if you can get the first day right, you can totally get the first week. If you can get that first week right, you can get the first month. And if you can get the first 90 days, you really will create the kind of employee experience that really will create the kind of employees that you expect. You're really laying the foundation. So it does take work. It takes some really intentional thought as a leader to create that first 90 days. And it's not just about getting more work out of them, but it's about creating the right tone, getting the right patterns in place, listening to them, letting them feel heard, appreciated. And all of that wraps together in that first 90 days. You get that right, you really won't have a problem with the retention. All right, now back to the interview with Todd. I really appreciate your perspective on this. Is there anything that we have overlooked inside of building great teams that I haven't asked you about?
Well, I just mentioned the testing. That's a big thing. I also think kind of, the communications and dialogue, there's a lot of, I think that there's a lot of, emotional volatility in organizations, in both when you're struggling and also when you're growing rapidly, that comes out, it's just forced out by the pressure, right? And so that communication around those things are critically important. And the leader of the team has to be incredibly sensitive to it and not overreact. So sometimes you'll have people that get very emotional about things, and be like, hey, it's okay. This isn't something we get mad about. This is something we discuss and figure out a solution to, so on and so forth. So that kind of being able to de-escalate emotions is a critical issue. Also, there's another aspect of communication I think is really important, where you have teams, and on those teams, if you've got a bunch of A players, they're all working really hard. And, and then you get these A players who work really hard, want to tell everybody about it, and then want to take credit for it. And what the theory of mind problem there is, they don't realize hey, the guy that I'm bragging to about how hard I'm working and trying to get credit for this hard work may or may not have worked just as hard as I have. But whether that's true or not, the problem is you now just cause that person to go, well, that was a weird thing to say. Why would they ask for credit for something like that? It's not really appropriate at this time. Desire credit we all want credit for our good work, but it's another thing to kind of ask for it and display it and everything else. So I kind of try to, work with people on that stuff to make sure that they're not, behaving that way. It just isn't a very senior way. And you see a lot of people, kind of do that. And you're just like, dude, you're just like, kind of like screwing up the vibe here with your, inordinate amount of back pats needed. So,
well, I want to ask you, Todd, what are you doing to recognize people? Because that's one area where companies really aren't taking the time to recognize and maybe even reward people. Is there anything specific you can share with us there?
So, yeah. So, I mean, I find a lot of recognition programs to be what I would call contrived and, almost uncomfortable. With that being said, we have kind of a ritual that we do our venture meetings twice a week, Mondays and Thursday mornings, where it's called Bright Spots. And during that period, everybody gets a chance to kind of talk about something successful or somebody that's done something good in the company. And so there's kind of this colleague to colleague recognition. There's, there's immediate recognition. It's not like you have to wait till the end of the quarter to get recognized for your good deeds. It's like, hey, great job helping out the team this week on this matter. We know you stayed here till 1 o'clock in the morning doing it. Thanks a lot. It was a huge deal and you got us over the hump. So that kind of stuff delivered in real time is incredibly valuable to the cohesiveness of the team and kind of the adhesion of the team to each other. They often both help solve each other's problems in those meetings, and then they also complement each other in those meetings. So yeah, it means a lot coming from me when I compliment somebody. Sure, that's hugely important, but all comments matter no matter where they come from, and seeing, your peer compliment your other peer for a job well done just sets a really good tone. And I think that has been hugely impactful for our team.
I would agree. And in fact, it may even be better for someone else to compliment a peer in front of you and the other team to see that. Have you seen that benefit?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the weird things is I've seen so the way we run our meetings, the meeting is kind of the critical portion of the team, meaning this is where it all comes together for 30 minutes to 60 minutes on every Monday and every Thursday morning. And we kind of engineered this where everybody gets a chance to kind of talk about what they're working on, what they're going to be working on, what they got done, all that stuff. Their updates take just a few minutes. Then we have an issues period of time. So everybody gets to talk. That's critical. Then everybody gets a chance to talk about, which if they have any at that point, put them out there on the table and talk about it and solve it right then and there. If we can't solve it right then and there, then we'll table it and come back and tell the team how it was solved. And then after that, everybody gets a chance to just say something nice. And we end the meeting on a nice note. Everybody relatively walks out happy, and nobody's going home and kicking their puppy or anything like that because they got crapped on in the company meeting. So, and the other really important thing about that is I'm not hogging all the bandwidth, right? I used to do that, right? I go in a meeting and I'd be talking the whole time, right? Now it's just I have as much airtime as everybody else, unless I want to get on the pedestal and kind of give a speech that day. But generally speaking, those speeches are maybe once a month or once every 2 months.
Well, I appreciate the detail there. A couple of things I want to go over here and see how they're addressed inside your work and leadership. Google did a study a few years ago called Aristotle. Are you familiar with the study on high-performing teams?
Only you mentioned it to me before.
So one of the core factors behind this is a sense of psychological safety. So they found that there's already smart people they're hiring, but it's not the most talented people that make the best high-performing team. It's teams that feel psychologically safe to share ideas without judgment and to work together through these issues. And ego is kind of pushed to the side. Have you seen that within your teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what we're built on. I when I make a mistake, I try to own up to it immediately. And you see a lot of leaders who just won't own a mistake, right? They can't lose face. That's not how I run things. And I think it's one of those things that based on, if you got a lot of smart people and you're trying to save face, you're probably going to lose a lot of trust and a lot of respect in the process. So by me owning my mistakes, other people own their mistakes. And therefore there's a cascade of trust that comes from that. And ultimately, when people make giant mistakes in our business, for sure, it happens all the time. And I think it's one of those things that by, not jumping all over people, but saying, okay, how did the mistake happen? Let's do an autopsy of it, understand, what got us here. That allows us to kind of, break it down and unless it's, something malfeasant or something like that. But, generally speaking, most of these mistakes are, there was a process problem. There was a management problem. There was a bunch of problems that maybe led up to it. And had we, kind of been able to, kind of stifle one or two of those issues along the way, it never would have happened. So learning those issues, are basically what prevents other things. So as far as idea generation, the team, can be like really great at generating ideas, and that's really wonderful. And you just got to let them do that. Sometimes you got to coax them a little bit by throwing a bad idea out so they can like jump all over it and be like, that idea's terrible. What about this? What about that? And sometimes by coaxing an idea out, you got to sit there and like look like a bit of a knucklehead in the process to do it. But it helps when people are like, oh, cool. I'm like showing my boss like how smart I am. And that's always helpful.
Well, I want to go through something. You talked about own your mistakes, and I want to step back a level or two because I think that's very important. But I've done hundreds of interviews with founders and CEOs just like you. One of the core patterns I found around this is companies that have a sense of ownership with their team. Like they really feel like owners. Like they can have a slice of the pie and that's all fine. They can get profit sharing. It's not about external drivers of money. It's about the internal part. Empowerment is one of the key factors of that. What are your feelings on making people feel like owners across the team, no matter what level they're at?
I totally agree. Navy, I walked into the commanding officer's office and he'd asked me for my ideas on a problem, and he told me to get out of his office, and if I wasn't part of the solution, I was part of the problem. And I know that's a little bit cliche, but it had a huge impact on me. And so, as far as training people to have ownership, I try to instill that in them. So basically when people come to me and they got a problem, I'm like, hey, listen, I'm busy, you're busy, but we'd both be less busy if you could come at least with some solutions. And then we could, pick through why one is the best or not. Or like, hey, you could have solved this yourself already. Instead, we're sitting here talking about it while money's wasting, right? So there's a bunch of like kind of what I would call subtle, management techniques to get people to get more ownership. Where I've got folks who, like that work for me here that like kind of when they graduated high school came to work here, or when I came around, and or when they graduate college, and they like I could walk out and they could run the show because they've just been beaten into them over the years. Not beaten, but you know what I mean. But like just basically like, hey, listen, how would you solve it? Why is that the best solution? Have you explored other solutions? Yeah, I've got this one, this one, this one. This is why I discounted them. And then sometimes if it's a big enough deal, maybe I have like some insight as to why it's why there might be another solution or another way to go about it.
So part of the whole concept around high-performing teams that you have, Todd, it seems like you really like to include everyone. It's not just your ideas. Your company wouldn't be running at the pace that it's running if you probably were expected to come up with every great idea the company had. Fair?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. I mean, I got a lot of good ideas for sure. But like at the same, I think that's like, ideas are, and for others, they're very abundant. And I'm one of those people, I'm lucky to have a lot of ideas or a lot of different ways to solve a problem. And I think I've attracted a lot of people like that. But you like, if you treat ideas with an abundance mentality as opposed to a scarcity mentality, I think you just get more great ideas on the table and ultimately more ways to solve problems and move forward. So I think, it's kind of just a mindset issue.
Well, Todd, I really appreciate you being here on the podcast, sharing your concepts, your strategies, some of the details behind what it takes to create great teams. So thanks for being here.
Anytime, Gene.
Wow, what a great interview. Really love his focus on creating great teams and truly empowering them and including them into ideas and really getting them to take ownership of their mistakes, taking ownership himself. All of these details are necessary to create high-performing teams. Now, hopefully you already have a high-performing team, but there's always a next level. Whenever you know that you're growing as a team, as a leader at a personal level, then you make sure that you want to keep that growth going. I work with leaders that are already successful who want to keep that growth, reach new levels of success. Really excited about the work I'm doing. So if I can help you with anything, make sure you reach out to Gene@genehammett.com. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.